Look in the mirror. If your eyes are green, you are staring at one of the rarest features on the entire planet. Rarer than being left-handed. Rarer than having red hair. Out of every 100 people you pass on the street, maybe 2 of them share what you see looking back at you. For most of human history, nobody could explain it. People blamed witchcraft. They blamed royal bloodlines. They blamed cursed marriages and everything except the truth. But now, scientists have finally traced the DNA, and what they found does not lead back to where anyone expected. It leads somewhere older, somewhere stranger, and it stretches all the way across Asia. Before we get into it, if you have green eyes or you know someone who does, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. This channel digs into the hidden history buried inside your DNA. The kind of stories your Ancestry test will never tell you, and there is a lot more coming. Now, let's talk about where green eyes really come from. Let's start with just how rare they actually are, because the numbers are honestly hard to believe. Brown eyes cover most of the planet. Somewhere around 3–4 of all humans have them, and in some regions even more. Blue eyes are the famous minority common across Northern Europe and scattered thinly everywhere else. But green sits in a category all its own. Depending on which survey you look at, green eyes show up in roughly 2% of people worldwide. 2 out of 100. In some countries, you could walk through a city and never meet a single green-eyed stranger. And that rarity is exactly why the myths piled up for so long. When something is that uncommon, people stop trying to explain it and start trying music to mythologize it instead. And mythologize it. They did. Across the ancient world, green eyes were treated as a sign of something otherworldly, and rarely in a flattering way. In parts of medieval Europe, a green-eyed woman risked being whispered about as a witch because anything uncommon was easy to fear. Elsewhere, green eyes got tangled up with jealousy and envy, which is part of why we still say someone is green with envy or talk about the green-eyed monster to this very day. Travelers told stories of green-eyed strangers as if they were describing a different species entirely. For thousands of months of years, that was the best anyone could do. When you cannot explain something, you decorate it with fear and folklore. It took modern genetics to strip all of that away and replace the superstition with something more incredible than any legend ever was. It also helps to know where green eyes actually cluster, because they are not spread evenly across the map at all. The highest concentrations on the entire planet are found in the north and west of Europe. In Ireland and Scotland, green eyes are dramatically more common than the global average, with a huge share of the population carrying them. Move across the rest of Europe and the numbers slowly taper off. And by the time you reach East Asia, Africa, or the Americas, green eyes become vanishingly rare. That uneven map is not random. It is a direct trail of where the ancient light eye mutation traveled, thrived, and mixed with everyone it met. Eye color, it turns out, is a quiet map of human migration written across billions of faces. So here is the first thing that is going to mess with your head. Your green eyes are not actually green. There is no green pigment in the human eye. None. Not a single molecule of it. If you took a green iris and ground it down to study mutt chemistry, you would never find a green dye hiding inside. So how are you looking at green right now? The answer is one of the strangest tricks in all of human biology. And once you understand it, you will never look at your own reflection the same way again. Everything comes down to what's called melanin. Melanin is the pigment that colors your skin, your hair, and the front layer of your iris. It really only comes in shades of brown and black. That is it. A lot of melanin in the iris gives you dark brown eyes. A little less and you drift toward hazel and amber. And when there is very little melanin at all, something else takes over. Light entering the eye gets scattered by the tissue itself, and the shorter blue wavelength bounce music back toward you. It is the same reason the sky looks blue. Even though the air is not painted blue, the color is not music. A pigment. It is physics. It is light behaving in a very particular way inside a very particular structure. Think about that for a moment because it is genuinely bizarre. The front of your iris is a translucent tissue, almost like a layer of frosted glass. And behind the visible color sits a darker backing. When light pours into your eye, it passes through that cloudy front layer and gets scattered along the way. The longer wavelengths, the reds and the warm yellows, slip through and get soaked up by the darker layer behind. But the shorter blue wavelengths bounce right back out toward whoever is looking at you. So a blue-eyed person is not showing music you a blue substance at all. They are showing you scattered light, the exact same trick of physics that paints the daytime sky. Every blue eye and every green eye music on this planet is in a very real sense carrying around a tiny fragment of the sky. That scattering effect is what creates music blue eyes. So where does green come in? Green is the in-between. Green eyes happen when you have that blue scattering effect, but with just a thin extra layer of a yellowish pigment called lipochrome music sitting on top of it. Blue light from the scattering, plus a soft wash of golden yellow from the lipochrome, and your brain blends the two into green. You are essentially looking at a living optical illusion. A trace of yellow, a scatter of blue, and a specific, delicate amount of melanin music that has to land in an incredibly narrow window. Too much melanin and you would be brown. Too little and you would be pure blue. Green only appears when everything lines up almost perfectly. That is a huge part of why it is so rare. Nature has to thread a needle to make it happen. And this is the crucial difference between music green and blue that hardly anyone understands. Blue is essentially an absence. Take away enough melanin, let the scattering take over, and you get blue. It is almost the default result of very low pigment. Green demands far more. It needs that same low pigment, but it also needs that specific dusting of golden lipochrome. And it needs the melanin to stop at an exact halfway point rather than dropping all the way down to nothing. That is why blue eyes can be common across whole nations, while green eyes stay stubbornly rare even in the places they show up the most. Blue is a single ingredient. Green is a full recipe, and it has to be followed almost perfectly every music single time, or you end up with something else. And that brings us to the real question. If green eyes are just this fragile combination of light and pigment, why do some people have them and most people don't? What decides it? The answer is written into your DNA on a stretch of code that most people have never heard of. And it is where this story starts to get genuinely wild. Buried inside your chromosomes is a region scientists have studied obsessively for the last 20 years. Two genes do most of the work here. The first is called OK2, and think of it as the melanin factory. OCA2 helps decide how much pigment your body pumps into the iris. The second gene is called HERK2, and this one is music the real key. HERK2 does not make pigment itself. Instead, it acts like a control music switch sitting right next to OCA2. Turning the melanin factory up or down, a tiny change in HERK2 can quietly dial the whole system back, telling your body to make less pigment than it otherwise would. And when researchers went hunting for the origin of light-colored eyes, this switch is exactly what they found. To understand how strange that discovery really was, you have to picture what these scientists were actually doing. They were reading through the genetic code letter by letter, searching for the one spot where light-eyed people differed from dark people. The human genome is billions of these letters, long and almost incomprehensibly vast instruction manual. And yet, when they finally zeroed in on the region controlling eye color, the difference came down to a change so small you could miss it if you blinked. A single tweak in the code, right in the switch that governs the melanin factory, dialing the pigment down just enough to change how a person's eyes catch the light. Here's where it gets almost unbelievable. A team of geneticists in Copenhagen spent years comparing the DNA of light-eyed people from wildly different corners of the world. People separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. And they discovered something that music stopped them cold. Nearly every one of these people carried the exact same tiny genetic switch in the exact same spot. Changed in the music exact same way. Not similar changes, the same one, down to the same letter of DNA. And there is really only one explanation for that. Every single one of them inherited it from the same person. One individual, one ancestor who lived long before recorded history, whose DNA quietly stamped itself onto their descendants and never let go. Sit with that for a second. If your eyes are light, you are almost certainly carrying a mutation that traces back to one human being, a person who lived somewhere around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, most likely near the shores of the Black Sea. Music in the borderlands where Eastern Europe brushes up against Asia. This person was not royalty. There were no kings back then, no thrones, no empires, just farmers and herders and small communities scratching a living out of the earth. But one of them was born with a small error in the melanin switch, an error that softened the pigment in their eyes. And instead of vanishing, that error spread. It rode down through the generations, across continents, through wars and migrations and famines, all the way to the face you see in the mirror. And this is not a loose guess or a poetic exaggeration. It is the cold logic of the DNA itself. When a genetic change appears independently in many different places, it usually looks slightly different each time because random mutations almost never land on the exact musing spot in the exact same way. But when the change is identical everywhere you look, right down to the individual letter of code, the only sensible conclusion left is that it happened once and was inherited by everyone who now carries it. That is the fingerprint of a single common ancestor. One person, one moment, one small copying error in the machinery of life, echoing across 10,000 years and hundreds of generations until it reached you. We will never know that person's name. We will never know if they were a man or a woman admired or feared for looking a little different. They left behind no monument, no writing, nothing at all except a whisper in the genetic code that outlived every empire that came after them. But every time a green-eyed or blue-eyed baby opens its eyes for the very first time, that ancient stranger is remembered in the only way that truly lasts. Not in stone, but in living tissue. That is a kind of immortality most kings never managed to buy. Handed for free to a nameless farmer who probably never traveled more than a few miles from the place they were born. Now, blue eyes are the cleaner version of that story because blue is mostly about that single switch. Green is a little more complicated and honestly a little more interesting. Green eyes need that same music reduction in melanin, but they also need the extra players. The specific amount of pigment, the lipochrome layer, the fine-tuning of several genes working together at once. So green did not appear from nowhere. It grew out of that same ancient light eye mutation, then got shaped further as populations mixed and moved and adapted to new lands. In a way, green eyes are a record of movement. They are what happens when that original Black Sea mutation traveled far from home and met new genetics along the road. And where did that road lead? East, deep into Asia. But before we follow that road, we have to answer something that has been bugging scientists for decades. Why did this mutation survive at all? A change that reduces pigment does not obviously help you survive. It does not make you faster, stronger, or better at finding food. In pure survival terms, light eyes should have been a footnote, a rare quirk that fizzled out. Instead, it exploded across an entire hemisphere. So what kept it alive? There are a few leading ideas, and they might all be true at once. The first is sunlight. As humans migrated north and east into regions with weaker sun and long dark winters, lighter features may have come bundled together with lighter skin, which helps the body produce vitamin music D in low light. Eye color and skin color share some of the same genetic machinery. So lighter eyes could have simply hitched a ride along with an advantage that had nothing to do with vision. The second idea is more human and frankly more fun. Rarity is attractive. In small ancient communities where nearly everyone had dark eyes, a person with striking light or green eyes stood out. They got noticed, they got remembered, and getting noticed has always music been half the battle when it comes to passing your genes forward. Over enough generations, being memorable can be its music own kind of survival. The truth is probably a messy blend of both, a little bit of biology and a little bit music of desire. So now we have our origin, a single ancestor near the Black Sea, a mutation that dimmed the pigment in the human eye, and a set of forces that kept it alive long enough to spread. Now, let's follow it on the journey that most people have no idea about, because the green story does not stay in Europe. It goes the other way. Around 5,000 years ago, waves of herders from the steppe grasslands north of the Black Sea began moving in every direction. These were people who had tamed the horse, who lived and traveled across open plains, and they carried their genetics with them like seeds on the wind. Some pushed west into Europe, but others turned toward the rising sun, moving east and south into Central Asia, across the land bridges that would one day become the great trade routes of the ancient world. They carried their language, their tools, their livestock, and yes, the light eye mutation. And as they settled among the peoples already living there, that mutation began appearing in places you would never expect to find it. We now have a fairly clear picture of who these steppe migrants were. They were tough, mobile, and relentless, pushing into new territory generation after generation, absorbing the people they met and passing their genetics steadily onward. Their impact on the human family tree is almost impossible to overstate. Enormous portions of the modern populations of both Europe and Asia still carry echoes of this single expansion out of the grasslands. So when that light eye mutation spread, it did not creep along slowly like a rumor passed between neighbors. It surged outward on the backs of horses carried by one of the most successful migrations ever. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and this whole region becomes threaded together by the Silk Road. This was not one road, but a sprawling web of routes connecting China music to the Mediterranean, running straight through the heart of Central Asia. For over 1,000 years, merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and travelers moved back and forth along it. And wherever people trade, people mix. Genes flowed along the Silk Road just as surely as silk and spices did. Light eyes, once a quirk of the western steppes, seeped into the mountain valleys and desert oases of Asia and settled in. And in a few isolated pockets cut off from the outside world by mountains and distance, that trait got trapped and concentrated, which is how you end up with something extraordinary. Deep in the mountains of northern Pakistan, in a remote region called the Kailash Valley, there lives a small community of people who look startlingly different from their neighbors. Fair skin, light hair, and strikingly often green and blue eyes. For generations, outsiders had a favorite explanation for them. The legend went that these were the lost descendants of Alexander the Great's army, soldiers who marched east over 2,000 years ago and never went home, leaving their light aid bloodline behind in the mountains. It is a beautiful story that tour guides and travel blogs still repeat. And here is the twist. When geneticists finally tested the Kailash DNA, the romantic legend mostly fell apart. The truth turned out to be even older than Alexander. The Kailash are not the leftovers of a Greek army. They appear to be an ancient, deeply isolated population whose ancestry splits off from other groups thousands of years before Alexander was ever born. Their light eyes did not come from a few wandering soldiers. They came from that same deep well of ancient West Eurasian ancestry. The same stream that carried the light eye mutation east out of the steppe long before any empire existed. In other words, their green eyes are not a souvenir from a famous conqueror. They are a living fossil, a trait preserved in mountain isolation for so long that it outlasted the very civilizations people tried to credit it to. The legend got the drama right and the history wrong. The real story is quieter, older, and far more impressive. And the Kailash are not alone. Travel through the mountain valleys of Central and South Asia, and you will keep finding these pockets in the Hanza Valley in parts of Afghanistan and the highlands of Nurstan and Chitral. Green and light eyes appear far more often than anyone would expect for that part of the world. Each of these communities is a little time capsule holding on to a genetic echo that rolled in thousands of years ago and got stuck there, protected by the mountains that kept the outside world at arm's length. When you see a green child in one of these valleys, you are not looking at an anomaly. You are looking at the endpoint of one of the longest genetic journeys in human history. And what makes these places so valuable to scientists is precisely how cut off they were. In a busy, well-connected region, a rare trait gets diluted. It blends into the crowd and slowly fades away. But wall a community off behind mountain passes and roaring rivers, have people marry mostly within the group for century after century. And a trait that arrived long ago gets locked firmly into place. It stops fading and starts concentrating instead. These isolated valleys became accidental laboratories preserving a slice of ancient ancestry the rest of the world blended away long ago. When researchers want to study the deep human past, communities like these are living archives. There is one face from this region that the whole world already knows, even if most people never learned the science behind it. In the mid-1980s, a photographer captured the portrait of a young Afghan girl in a refugee camp, and her piercing green eyes ended up on the cover of one of the most famous magazines on Earth. That single image became one of the most recognized photographs ever taken. People were mesmerized by those eyes, and for years, nobody could quite say why they hit so hard. Part of the answer is simply that green eyes are rare enough to feel almost otherworldly. But the deeper answer is the one we have been building this whole time. Those eyes were the visible tip of an invisible music history. A mutation that began near the Black Sea, rode east across the steppe, drifted down the Silk Road, and finally surfaced in the face of a child in the mountains of Central Asia. She was not an exception to music the story. She was the story. So let's bring this all the way back to you. If you are watching this with green eyes of your own, What does all of it actually mean? It means you are carrying something genuinely ancient somewhere in your family line. Going back further than any name, further than any photograph, further than any country that exists on a modern map. One of your ancestors picked up that original light eye mutation, and against staggering odds, it survived. It made it through thousands of years of chance, through countless generations where it could have simply blinked out and disappeared. Every green-eyed person alive is proof that it didn't. And here is the part that ties Musica together, the part that surprises almost everyone. That mutation does not respect the borders we care about today. It does not care whether your family is European, Central Asian, Middle Eastern, or a blend of all three. The same tiny genetic switch shows up in a Danish fishing village and in a Pakistani music mountain valley in Turkey, and in Ireland and Afghanistan, and in Scotland. Green eyes are one of the clearest reminders we have that the neat categories we use to music divide people are much younger and much shallower than the DNA underneath them. Under the skin, we are far more tangled together than we like to admit. A green-eyed woman in the Kalash Valley and a green-eyed man in rural Ireland are, in a very real and literal sense, distant cousins, both carrying a gift from the same forgotten ancestor. This is also why a simple ancestry music test can feel amazing and frustrating at the very same time. It might tell you that you are some blend of a handful of regions, a neat little pie chart of tidy percentages, but it rarely tells you the deeper story, the actual journey your traits took to reach you. Your green eyes are the perfect example. A test might flag some European ancestry music and stop right there, never once mentioning that the exact same music mutation is sitting in mountain villages thousands of miles to the east, or that it began with a single person on the edge of Asia, long before Europe as we know it even existed. The percentages are just the surface. The real inheritance is the story buried underneath them, and that is the part almost nobody music gets to hear. Now, there are a few other things worth knowing about your green eyes while we are here, because the trait comes with some interesting company. Because green eyes have less music melanin than brown ones, they let a little more light through, which can make them slightly more sensitive to bright sun. That is not a flaw, it is just the same low pigment feature that makes them beautiful, showing up in a different way. There is also ongoing research into subtle links between eye color and other traits. Though that science is still young, and you should be wary of anyone claiming your eye color determines your personality. What we can say with confidence is the deep stuff. The ancestry, the migration, the shared origin, that part is solid music. And that part is remarkable enough on its own. Here's another quirk worth knowing.